We all know that writing a book isn't an easy task, but today I wanted to talk about the aspects of writing my first novel that were harder than I expected. I'm writing my debut fantasy novel, which I'm currently editing the first draft of, and I'm almost finished, but editing is a beast of its own that I'm gonna have to cover in another video. And these aren't in any ranked order, these are just some of the things that I found most challenging during the process of writing my first book. That being said, let's get to it. I've got 5 things that I found most challenging while writing my first book, and the first of which is show, don't tell. And if you're at all in the writing space or authortube or on TikTok, Threads, whatever, everyone who has advice about writing says this. But when you're writing for the very first time, you're writing your very first novel, it's a lot harder than you expect. This includes how someone is feeling. And looking back during the process of editing, the amount of times that I said, I feel, or they felt, or describing the emotion on someone else's face rather than actually describing the symptoms of said emotion, it's embarrassing. Granted, as I got further along and I started to kind of develop better writing skills, putting in hours and hours and hours of writing, it got less and less, but during the first half, for sure, it was a little embarrassing. And the issue with this is telling how someone is feeling has very little emotional impact compared to actually showing how they're feeling. Describing the symptoms and signs of an emotion actually allows the reader to feel what the character's feeling. Whereas when you just tell the reader, it's just kind of like a cold scientific fact rather than an emotion. And when you're telling a story, you want the reader to feel what that story feels like, feel what the character's feeling while experiencing the story. So just as an example, and this isn't really a writing sample, just an example to show you what I'm talking about. So see if you can feel the difference in this. He looked hurt at her offhanded comment. Very simple, tells the reader that this person was feeling hurt because someone said something insulting or snide. So that versus his shoulders slouched forward and he no longer made eye contact with anyone in the room after her cutting remark. So you see how the one shows how the character is feeling in regard to that insult, whereas the other just tells you how they're feeling. And it's just like, okay, he was hurt at the remark, let's move on. Versus the other gives you visceral descriptions and allows you to feel the hurt that the character feels. And another example of this, rather than in regard to interpersonal relationships, is how your character feels in different scenarios and circumstances. For example, my novel is in the first person point of view and the story is being told through the eyes of my main character. And a lot of the times I would find myself telling how the atmosphere made them feel, how an awkward situation made them feel, how an uncertain situation made them feel, rather than showing. So another example of this, and this isn't from my novel or my writing in general, it's just an example to show you the difference of telling versus showing. So instead of the quiet made me anxious, showing would be more something like the silence is deafening. So quiet I can feel my heart fluttering in my chest. My stomach squirms like my insides are made of worms. So you see the difference in that. The one example is very cold and clinical, whereas the other one is very emotive and evocative of how the character's feeling. So that's something I had to really work on in editing, and also when I started to catch on and learn how to implement that more in my writing in like the second half of the book, I really had to watch and pay attention because I would find myself still telling rather than showing in a lot of instances. And as a new writer, that can be something that you might struggle with for a little while. I know I still do, so I'm trying to be more intentional with my writing and make sure that I am showing more than telling. And not to say that there isn't a time or place to just tell a simple fact rather than using 3 to 4 sentences to describe it, but in a lot of cases where you really want to make an emotional impact and allow the reader to be absorbed into the main character's point of view or into a character's point of view, showing is a lot better than telling. So another thing that I found harder than I expected to do was not switching tenses. Now, what I mean by that is when you're writing a novel, you pick a tense to tell the story from, whether that's past tense and it's kind of a retelling of the events of what happened, or present tense, which allows you to experience the story as it unravels and puts you right there in the moment. So it's really important when you sit down to write a novel to consider which tense you want to tell the story from and stick with it throughout the whole book. Otherwise, it can feel very jarring and incongruent with the rest of the novel. As a completely new writer, when I started writing my first book, there were a lot of instances in the first third where I found myself switching from present tense to past tense, sometimes even in the same sentence. I did catch it when I started kind of rereading, because sometimes when I'm writing, I like to reread the chapter that I worked on the day before or what I did the day before to get back in the headspace to write the next chapter or next few pages or whatever I'm working on. And I ended up catching myself doing this in that instance. So I started to catch on and I started to pay more attention. It still happened throughout the book where I did catch it in the later part, but it was very present in the first third of the book. But now because of a simple mistake, I have a lot more editing work to do just to catch that so that my story doesn't pull people out of it by switching tenses. And as a new writer, when you're focusing on telling the story, it can almost slip your mind. You don't even notice you're doing it. It just kind of happens as you're trying to get the words and the story out on the page. So it's important to be mindful and pay extra attention in the beginning so that you don't have a lot more extra work to do later on. And again, I have an example, but it's not a writing sample of my own writing. It's just to kind of emphasize what I'm talking about. So I'll give you the example of switching tenses in the same sentence and then what it should be like afterwards. So switching tenses would be: the sky was blue and cloudless. The midday sun beams down on my skin. I felt its warmth seep into my bones. Now, did you catch that? Because this is how it should be if you're writing in present tense. The sky is blue and cloudless. The midday sun beams down on my skin. I feel its warmth seep into my bones. So again, it's very simple and easy to miss when you're just focusing on getting the story out on the page, but it makes a huge difference when you're reading it on whether you get absorbed into the story or whether something just kind of pulls you out even if you don't really realize what it was at that moment. It just doesn't feel natural because it's not. You're telling the story from one perspective, but then you're switching to another and then switching back. So it's important to be very mindful of this. But again, it's harder than I expected because I had to go back and correct a lot of mistakes and even found them in the later portions of my writing when I had already kind of tuned into it, but it still kind of just slipped through sometimes. So make sure you pick a tense and you stay with it. The next thing that was harder than I expected was blank page syndrome. And every writer and author struggles with this to some degree. But I didn't realize when I had the idea for my story and I was formulating it in my head of what the general idea and basis for the story would be, that when I sat down and saw the little blinking cursor on my Word document, how difficult it would be to figure out how to start the story, how to get into it, where should I start the story, what scene, what perspective, what's going on. And then every time since, when you see that little blinking cursor and a blank page after you finish writing a scene, it's the same struggle. The pressure and freedom that a blank page brings is crazy. The pressure of, I'm in charge of telling this story, what happens next? Yet the freedom of, I'm in charge of telling the story and anything can happen next. Now this may happen to a varying degree depending on what type of author you are. They always say that there's a pantser or a plotter, and someone who's a pantser, just as it seems, flies by the seat of their pants and doesn't really plot out much or at all and makes things up on the go. Where a plotter will sit down and plot out the entire story from start to finish, or even to some degree, some level of plotting. Everyone has their own process. If you have something mapped out, it can be a little easier when you're actually sitting down to write the story to just kind of go from one thing to the next because you already got an idea of where you're going. When you don't, that's where you might struggle with it a bit more. I know I did. I definitely pantsed this first novel because I was so excited to just get writing the book after having the idea that I just wanted to get right to it. But I did find myself anytime I finished writing one scene wondering, okay, now where do I go next? What happens next? I almost wish that there was someone to tell me, but it's up to me. And again, that's the fun part of it because, you can take it anywhere you want to go, but at the same time, there's also pressure to it because you want to make sure that whatever happens next is the most interesting and actually progresses the story in a logical manner. But I never realized how intimidating that little cursor could be. So the next thing that I struggle with is something that I struggle with a lot, and that is self-doubt. I'll probably make a more in-depth video on this topic alone because there's a lot to kind of cover, but just as a general sense, self-doubt is something that really plagues you when you're writing a novel. At least it did me. There will come a point when you're writing your book, and there might be many points, like I said, there was for me, where you'll question if it's good, if your writing is good, if the story is good, if people will even want to read it, if you'll ever even be able to get it published. You might even ask yourself, why am I even doing this? What's the point? It may even feel like a waste of time sometimes. I asked myself every single one of those things, and I struggled and wrestled with that throughout the entire process of writing my first novel. And it's not easy, but you have to quiet those voices and just pick yourself up, put yourself at your keyboard and keep going. And you have to remember when, for me, I felt like I was wasting my time sometimes because it wasn't accomplishing anything monetarily at the moment. And, that's again going into a more in-depth video later on of why I struggle with that and that kind of thing. But that was how I felt. But the big thing to remember is, you're not wasting your time because even though you're not making money at it, you're doing it because you love telling stories. stories. You enjoy creating worlds and creating characters and scenarios for those characters to experience. It's definitely something you need to do for yourself first before you can do it for other people. And so if you're doing it for yourself, then it's not a wasted time, especially if you enjoy it. I mean, it's very important that you enjoy it. Otherwise, why would you be doing it? The biggest comfort and also depressing fact that I've kind of learned from other authors and people who've been writing books for a lot longer than I have is that this is a universal experience to some degree. Comforting, right? Other authors struggle with the same thing. The depressing part is it never goes away no matter what level of success you achieve. There's always some form of self-doubt. Maybe not, will I be able to get published if you're already a published successful author, but will this next book sell well? Will my publishing house be happy with this? Will my readers be happy with this? I feel it's my best work, but what if other people hate it? There's always some level of self-doubt, no matter where you are in your journey and what level of success you've achieved. But you do it, I'm assuming, at least for me anyway, because creativity is in your blood. It's in your DNA. I'm a creative person. I always have been. I'm a musician. I was a singer-songwriter for a while and still am. I still love music. I still love playing music, writing songs, singing. It still brings me joy and comfort. And then I also enjoy photography, videography, all the creative arts I enjoy. I enjoy art itself, like drawing and painting. I'm not any good at it at all. I wish I was. My wife and sister can attest to the fact that I'm not any good at it, but I wish I was because I love it. I love the artistic expression of being able to visually bring something to life on paper or a digital document or something like that. But for the most part, I'm stuck with music and words because I'm, again, like I said, not artistic. So the important thing, just keep going and remember that the self-doubt is there, and hopefully if you keep forging ahead, that voice will become quieter and quieter as you keep going and proving that voice wrong. So just keep it up. And finally, the last point for this video that I found harder than expected, especially now that I've reached the end of my novel and I'm kind of getting closer to the goalposts of querying the novel to literary agents and trying to get published. And that is the dreaded blurb. I never realized how hard writing a short, concise summary of the core point of what your book is about can be. My novel's just under 120,000 pages right now, and that was much easier than trying to come up with 150 to 200 word blurb about what my book is about. And I think a big thing to do with that is overthinking it. I overthink it a lot when I'm writing it because you want it to be so good and so intriguing that anybody who reads your blurb wants to read your book. But you also don't want to spoil anything and give too much away. And that's especially if you're trying to get traditionally published. You have to come up with a blurb to send to a literary agent who can then take that blurb and pitch it to a publisher. So the pressure for it to be good is overwhelming. And therefore you get caught in the process of overthinking it. And it's also super important not only to get representation and to get published, but also to be able to sell your book. People need to be intrigued and need to want to know more about what your book is about to the point of purchasing it. So I think that added pressure is what gets you overthinking and gets you stuck in a loop of the blurb isn't good enough, rewriting the blurb, writing it over and over and over and over again, and still probably not thinking it's good enough. At least that's where I'm at. So those were some of the things that I struggled with and found harder than I expected when writing my first novel. If you're an author or writer, drop in the comments what are some of the things that you found harder than expected when writing your first book. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it entertaining and informative of the struggles of writing a novel and writing your first book. If you're a new writer or even if you're a reader, some of the things that go on behind the scenes for the author of the books that you're reading. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell so that you can get all the updates for all the new videos. And until next time.